You are very welcome to Trasin and Atira. And as you know, we're not going to let the virus get in the way of us remembering our history. My name is Marcus Howard, and today is the 99th anniversary of the burning of the Customs House. I'll be interviewing historian and author Liz Gillis about this, and she's written a book about the burning of the building available from Commemorations Tales, which you can see here, the burning of the Customs House. Upcoming talks this week, we have Tuesday, Kerry's Fight for Freedom in the Civil War by Pat Lawler. On Wednesday, Common Naman Emigration by Seaver Aiken. On Thursday, the GAA and the Irish Language Revival by Dr. Cathal Billings. And on Friday, The Art of the Irish High Crosses by Professor Robert Stally. Liz Gillis is from the Liberties and very proud of it too. She works as a researcher for the History Show on RT Radio and is the author of 6 books about the Irish Revolution, including Women of the Irish Revolution, which I have here, The Hales Brothers and the Irish Revolution, which I also own, as well as The Fall of Dublin, which I also own, and many other books. She's bankrupted me. Liz has worked as a researcher on numerous publications, TV and radio documentaries covering the period. She's appeared on the Easter Rising Stories YouTube channel on my documentaries about Dan Breen, Sean Tracy, Michael Collins, the Hales Brothers, and Maud Gonne. Liz has also developed a revolutionary walking tour of our native Liberties. And in 2018, Liz was a recipient of the Lord Mayor's Award for her contribution to history. Liz is the co-organiser of the annual conference on the burning of the Customs House in 1921. So you're very, very welcome to the talk, Liz. And can I just ask you, why did you decide to write your book on the burning of the Customs House?
Well, just want to say a big thanks to yourself and to everyone trusting us here for doing this, because it is the 99th anniversary of burning the Custom House. And what made me write the book, I suppose, goes back to when I was working as a guide at Commemorations jail with Micheál O'Divlin. And Micheál was digitising this handmade photo album, which are the 68 photographs of these photographs of men that were in prison in Commemorations jail. And they had names underneath them, and Micheál just came to me and said, Liz, do you know any of these names, whatever? So I just started looking into them, and the witness statements from the Bureau of Military History had been released, and their names started popping up in the witness statements, and one story connected them, and it was the burning of the Custom House. But these guys had been imprisoned as a result of the burning of the Custom House. And I would have been of the opinion that the Custom House op was a disaster, you know, IRA were wiped out in Dublin, what has been said. But the testimonies of these men who were involved and who had been imprisoned was a very, very different narrative that was emerging. And I had to start listening to what these guys were saying. And then from that, this whole story it expanded through doing tours in Kilmaine, and relatives of the guys were coming in, and we started talking to them, and it was just a huge, huge story began to unfold that did question the dominant narrative. So we decided the only way we're going to get the story out to the general public is to write it in a book. And even when we were writing it, more information has come out thanks to the release of the pension files. And that opened up a whole world. People we hadn't got a clue that were involved in this operation. All of a sudden, they were being revealed to us. So I was like, we have to get this down. And so in 2017, the book was published.
Okay. Why did you decide to attack the Customs House? Like, if you watch the Michael Collins movie, it's often seen as De Valera's strategy, but was there more to it?
Oh, big time. The Custom House was always on the radar of the IRA. It's not a question of if the Custom House is going to be attacked, it's a matter of when. And it goes back to Dick McKay, 1918, with the conscription crisis, where Britain threatened to introduce conscription to Ireland. And Dick McKay, if you can imagine, he was promoted to the position of Brigadier of the Dublin Brigade. The IRA was not organised. This is a couple of years after 1916. They're only getting on their feet. And he proposed that they would attack the Custom House. It would actually be like a mini 1916. That was going to be cordons thrown up all across the city, especially in the area surrounding the Custom House. And there was going to be local lads that were going to be in charge of each street. And if there was a battle, that if a street did fall, it was another street that could be held, because it was the local members of the IRA that were going to be fighting this, but the main focus would be the custom house. Also, barracks around the area, around the city, were going to be isolated and so on, so they could not get into and stop an attack on the custom house. It didn't happen, and he put the plans forward to GHQ, of which Michael Collins was a member of, and it didn't happen because conscription was not introduced. Dick McKee does not give up on the idea, because in 1920 he resurrects the idea and puts it to GHQ again. And the only thing was why it wasn't, or why it didn't happen in 1920, was because they had a much bigger operation in mind, which was the burning of the income tax record offices around the country. Now, the reason for this was you have the originals being in these income tax offices all around the country, some being in people's houses, some being in actual physical buildings. There was an office opposite the Custom House. And on the 3rd and 4th of April 1920, it was the weekend of the 4th anniversary of the Easter Rising. Literally all of Ireland went up, because there were fires getting set left, right and centre. RAC, that barracks that had been evacuated, were also getting destroyed. What that meant then was that there was the only surviving copies of those income tax office records. They were then in the Custom House. In late September 1920, members of the 4th Battalion Dublin Brigade, they actually got into the Custom House because there was an armoury there, and they went in at lunchtime. There was an armed guard there. They had clerks walking in the Custom House. That's how they knew the lay of the land. They get into the building, go to the armoury, but there were more guards on, so they pulled back. So then what you have in 1921 in May is all elements of these 3 previous attempts or suggestions to attack it, that then finally culminate on the 25th of May. David being away in America, he's looking at the international perspective, the propaganda, because this was a propaganda war as well. And he saw the way Ireland was being portrayed, the IRA were being portrayed. They were a band of assassins, they were a group of murderers and killers. And the Dáil had been the democratically elected government of the people. The IRA were the army of that government. So he suggested large-scale attacks, which were not unusual. They were not unusual. They had been carrying out large-scale attacks in 1920 and 1921. And his thing was to have like one major engagement a month. And this would be taking huge amounts of them. But 2 suggestions he put forward was to attack Burgess Bush Barracks, which was the HQ of the Casualties. And Burgess Bush, it's surrounded by houses. It's not a very feasible target. The other option was the Custom House. Now, all the previous planning had really been put in place because you had Dick McKee planning so much in 1918 and 1920. And after looking at the feasibility of the 2 options, they decided to go for the Custom House.
Okay. What happened though on the day of the Customs House attack?
Well, I suppose just the whole plan of it was that they were going to go in at lunchtime. There were 120 men. This is one of the sort of controversial aspects of it, that it was 120 men that took part in it, and they're the ones that are arrested or lost. You have a huge support network from the other battalions. So the 2nd Battalion, those 120 men would be 2nd Battalion that would actually go into the Custom House. And the reason they choose the 2nd Battalion is because the Custom House was in the 2nd Battalion area. Oscar Traynor, who has succeeded Dick McKee as the OC of the Dublin Brigade, this is his area. And he appoints Tom Ennis as the commandant, the commander of that actual operation. So it's his men that will be in the building setting fire to the contents. Because the objective was not to destroy the building, it was to destroy the contents. Civil administration. And that's what the Custom House was, a symbol of, the last symbol of civil administration, British civil administration in Ireland. So you've got stamp duty, you've got copies of wills, local government and all there. So they're the records that they were to destroy. That's why that building was a target. The other battalions, 3rd, 4th and 4th battalions will be in the surrounding areas. The Squad and Active Service Unit, they were called in to basically help gather the staff in the foyer. And then the idea would be that at 10 to 1, so at lunchtime, a truck would arrive with tins of paraffin, not petrol, paraffin, and the workmen would go in volunteers dressed up as workers. They're going in and out, they're doing their business at lunchtime. It wouldn't sort of raise eyebrows. The plan was the staff would then be gathered, and each man would go to a floor, go to an appointed room, and at the signal of one whistle blast, they would then get ready to fire the room, empty all the documents out. Two whistle blasts would signal the evacuation of the building, that the fire had actually taken hold. And the whole plan was that it would last 20-25 minutes at most. They had 6 rounds of ammunition, and then they were to be in and out, and that was planned. No one was meant to die that day. It was to be a spectacular operation as well, in broad daylight. And then what actually happens on the day, it all goes to plan. They go in at 10 to 5 to 1. The trucks arrive, and the volunteers at the same time descend. You can imagine the scene, because they're coming from Beresford Place, and they're coming from Gardner Street, they're coming from all the surrounding streets. Fellas, not just from the 2nd Battalion, but from the 4th Battalion, all these different companies. Fellas are coming, making their way to Book Bridge. There's fellas taking over positions in Tower Street, they're taking over positions out in Pembroke, and the fire stations are being taken over. But that was a huge thing, that the fire brigade, they had to be isolated in the city. So while you've got the concentration of fellas protecting the outside of the building, you've also got the fire brigade stations being isolated, being occupied by members of the volunteers, Tower Street being right across the road from the Custom House. What then happened is that there was a whistle blast. No one else but Tom Ennis was meant to have a whistle. A whistle blast was heard, and some lads came running down, and they hadn't finished preparing the rooms. They say to Tom Ennis, the rooms aren't ready. He says, get back up. And that caused a 5-minute delay. And in that time, a patrol of auxiliaries were coming by the Custom House. The fellas on the outside were told not to fire on any passing patrol. However, you have a description or an account from one volunteer that was there on the outside that said, as the auxiliaries passed by, the truck seemed to slow down, and an auxiliary looked to see that there was smoke and flames coming out of the windows, and started to point. And one of the volunteers then, within seconds of that, throws the grenade, took it into his own hands, and then the firefight ensues. After that, you have that 5-minute delay did cause the delay of the men getting out, because that patrol had come on. But then a firefight ensues. You have a number of men making their way out, trying to get out. After the 6 rounds of ammunition were gone, it was basically decide what to do, stay or go. Some decided to try and make their way out, which they did. You have the auxiliaries gaining entry into the building as well. They separated the staff from the volunteers. There's a great photograph of the staff being identified by their supervisors, and then what's left is a group shot predominantly of IRA volunteers, and you can sort of tell who's IRA and who's not, because the IRA tend to have their heads down with their hats, whereas the civilians are like, full frontal, I'm not one of them type thing, And then Tom Ennis was the last one to leave. He was horrifically wounded as he made his way out. He was shot twice, 3 times in the groin, and managed to make his way to home. Got to a nursing home. Geraldine O'Donnell was the nurse there, and like she said, she'd never seen injuries like it. But he did manage to survive and recover from his wounds. Now, the objective was to destroy the contents, and that was achieved. That building burnt. Like the burning of the building was not meant to happen. It was just the content, but the whole building went up as a result of it.
Okay. In terms of the aftermath, and again, you were saying about the picture, you can kind of see it here. What happened in the aftermath of the burning of the Customs House? And I know you're saying about Tom Ennis getting injured, but how were they treated?
Well, not very well. To be honest, well, it depended. Some volunteers in their witness statements, they recall, because it depended who you were greeted by, because there were British military there, soldiers as well as auxiliaries. And one volunteer talked about a soldier. He asked the soldier to get him cigarettes. The soldier couldn't get him cigarettes, ended up giving him his cigarettes, and because he didn't know when he would actually get cigarettes. but others were beaten by the auxiliaries. One case is Ned Breslin, because when they were searching him, they found a bullet in his waistcoat. There was a hole in his waistcoat, and the bullet had just fallen through, and so they discovered the bullet. So obviously this definitely makes him, you know, it's no doubt that he was involved, and he got an unmerciful hiding from the Aussies. You have a number of them, the majority of them. So 120 men are in the building. You have close to 300 men and 4 women. There were 4 women involved, either in the planning or in the events that day, that I know of at the moment. Didi is one of them. And they were, the majority of those arrests were taken to Arbor Hill prison first, held there for a couple of weeks, and then brought to Commemorations jail, which is like a holding area. It's like anyone who is awaiting trial or waiting to be identified, that's where they were taken. 11 were taken to Mountjoy, and they were the ones that they knew. They were wanted, they knew who they were, they're high up on the list, the Aussies wanted list, and they were then taken to Mountjoy. And then you have them being interrogated in Dublin Castle, where some of them, a number of them did receive beatings by the Aussies.
Okay. In terms of the fire brigade, what role did they play though in this?
Well, these 2 photographs are amazing, because the photograph on my left is before the fire brigade arrived. The photograph on my right is after the fire brigade arrived. That's one aspect of their involvement. The planning, the whole planning, they could not have gone into the custom house without the help of the fire brigade, because the fire brigade told them what materials to use, what they need to use. Joe Connolly, and this is, Laz Fallon has done amazing work on this. He is the one that has brought the fire brigade story, not just in relation to custom house, but the whole Irish Revolution. He's brought that story to light. The reason they chose paraffin, to use paraffin, or told them to use paraffin, because petrol had been used in burning the barracks, and a number of volunteers had died or were horrifically injured because it's an explosive, whereas paraffin was less volatile. You also have them telling them what needs to be isolated in terms of the fire brigade stations. Tara Street, Joe Connolly, that's where he was based. Now, when the fire began to take hold, and obviously the first reaction from the public is ring the fire brigade, there's a fire. That's what they did, and the calls are being answered in Tara Street fire station, and they were being told, help is on the way, don't be worrying. It was a volunteer that was answering the phone. Joe Connolly had let them in. When the police and the auxiliaries realised, 45 minutes in, there is a fire brigade station right across the water. There is no fire engine coming. 2 literally a minute's drive away. What the hell's going on? And they send over people to find out what's going on. And there's a great description that as they're hammering on the door to get into Tara Street, Joe Connolly is bundling the volunteers into the fire engine, or the ambulance. He drives them out just as the Aussies get in, drives them to a point of safety, they get away, and then he arrives at the custom house to put out the fire with a number of other firemen who were members of the Citizen Army or were members of the Irish Volunteers. And there's a great photograph, and this described in Harry Colley's witness statement, where later on, hours as the building is like literally in flames, he talks about seeing an auxiliary given out to a fireman. So the fireman had his hose in the liffey. There's no shortage of water to put out this bloody fire, right? His hose was not being aimed at the fire, it's aimed on the ground. And this is what they were doing. They also smuggled out guns. There was, according to Laz, there was 80 revolvers that the fire brigade retrieved from the custom house, got them back to the Citizen Army, that made their way back then to the volunteers. Also, they found a number of volunteers within the building. They got one of the firemen to get out to Tara Street, bring back uniforms, dressed up the lads, got them away. And what was crucial, to a point to make with this, that was one building that burned for days and days. They put out the fires in Easter week in a matter of a day, probably not even that, and that's a whole street or half of a street. That building burned for days, and that was down to the Dublin Fire Brigade. and they hadn't got a clue. The auxiliaries were getting blamed on stuff. Another example I'll give you, when they got into salvage, see what could be salvaged, there was one chap, a worker, he was a supervisor, and there were two safes in his room. One had been destroyed, smashed open, but the other one was closed. All the documentation in it was intact, it was safe. He went back a couple of days later, that safe had been smashed open and the contents had been destroyed. The auxiliaries got the blame on it, and that was done for it.
That's an amazing story. Amazing, amazing fire brigade.
Tip of the iceberg.
This would have been, you know, when you're saying about a minute away, like in the fire station. Was it this fire station here you were talking about?
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Your street, isn't it? Or
yeah, literally, you can see it from the custom house.
Yes. You mentioned about the 5-minute delay, but could you just explain it again for people who maybe might have missed it or don't know what was meant by that 5-minute delay?
So basically, it was a 25-minute operation, and the whistle blast before the men go, as they're given the orders of what's actually going to happen. And the order was that Tom Ennis, the commandant, he was the only one that was to have the whistle. And when all the men would go up, go into the building, you have the squad and you have the service unit designated to take care of the staff in the central hall. The other volunteers would then go to their allotted positions, and then once they're ready, then a signal, one whistle blast would be given, and then once word would filter back down to Tom Ennis that everyone was prepared, then you would have the order to fire, and then 2 whistle blasts would be get out. But what had happened in the meantime was that someone had a whistle. There was another whistle, and someone blew it before the lads had prepared all of the rooms. So what happened was that they ran down to Ennis to explain they hadn't fully prepared the room, and he said, get back up. So in that time of them running down and running back up, that was that 5-minute delay. And in that time, the auxiliaries were passing by the building, and then they had seen the smoke, according to one volunteer. And when the auxiliary looks and stops, they're then attacked with grenades by the volunteers that were at Liberty Hall.
Okay. Could you tell me a little bit about some of those who died?
Yeah, well, 5 volunteers died on that day, and 4 civilians also died. You had Dan Head. He was 17 years old. This is the photograph of Dan. And a book has been written recently, published by Micheál Cumain and Tales, and it was written by Michael McKee, who is a relative of Dan's. It's a fantastic account. And I have to give a mention to the relatives group. They have a website. The clock is still going, and it's a fantastic resource for the stories of the volunteers, the civilians. It's just a brilliant resource. So if anyone wants to check that out, the clock is still going. That's their website. So Dan Head, the thing about Dan Head was he was a veteran. He was a member of the Fianna, even though he was only 17, going on 18 at the time of his death. He was very experienced. His MO actually was to sort of throw grenades at passing, patrols, and that's actually how he was killed. What happened was that as he was outside, he was near the Loop Line Bridge together with Edward Dorrance, who also died on that day. He was 23, I think, at the time. Both of these are members of the 2nd Battalion. And outside as well was Oscar Traynor, who was the commandant of the Dublin Brigade, and Paddy O'Daly. Paddy O'Daly had tried to get into the custom house from the Liffey side, but the door was locked, so he's on the outside looking. But as the patrol passes, they're seeing. So Dan Head, and it's quite possible that was Dan Head's grenade that was the one that opened up the attack, because he saw there's 2 officers that are in the line of fire. So he threw the grenade. That saved the life of Traynor and O'Daly, but Dan Head was shot at least 5 times. He was killed outright. Edward Dorrance, he was shot, it looks to be around the same time, because it seems that him and Head were together. You had the O'Reilly brothers, Stephen and Patrick, and it seems that they were sent on a special job. because Joe Leonard mentions that they had some special work to do that day. That's the only thing I can find out about them, what they were doing that day. But it was bad enough, you know, having to break the news to mother that one of our sons is being killed, but 2 of our sons killed that day. And also you had Sean Doyle. Now Sean Doyle was the brother of Patrick Doyle, who had been executed in Mountjoy in March 1921, and there's a very poignant letter that Sean wrote, or Patrick wrote to Sean before he was executed, and he ends it with, hopefully it won't be too long, I'm paraphrasing here, but before I see it. And well, 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, Sean, the exact same thing, he was killed. He was shot as he was making his way out of Custom House, because he was a member of the squad. He would have been one of the wanted men, and him and Jim Slattery made a dash for it. He was shot through the lung, managed to get to the Martyr Hospital. Jim Slattery was shot through the hand. He actually lost his hand as a result of that, but he survived. Then you had the civilians. Francis Davis was the caretaker, and he was shot by Jimmy Conroy, and Conroy, you know, stated that and so on. And the reason they were shot was because he tried to get help. He tried to signal, get a signal out that the building was being overtaken. Mahon Lawless, he was actually a clerk in the Custom House, and the auxiliaries, when they got in, they thought that he was a volunteer, and he was shot. That was a total case of mistaken identity. And then you had John Bourne and James Conley, and they were 2 civilians. John Bourne was shot as he was actually cycling by the Custom House, and you can actually see in one of the photographs, it's the wide shot, say looking from where the bus depot is now, and you can see a body line, but then you can see a bicycle, and it's most likely that was John Bourne, and that's his bicycle he was shot as he was cycling past.
In terms of the loss of weapons, did the loss of weapons push the truce forward or not? Because the truce happened soon after this.
I don't know if you could say the loss of weapons, because again, as has been revealed by Laz, like Laz Fallon, 80 guns were retrieved from within the Custom House. So if you consider 120 men are within the building, so that's a loss of 40 guns. If you look at it that way, because the men on the outside, all those in the surrounding area, the members of the 1st Battalion, and the members of the 4th Battalion Active Service Unit that were on the bridge, their guns went with them. I think the Custom House is, in my mind, is one of the events that leads to a serious thought or thinking about a truce. Because this was a huge daytime, you know, an operation that took place in the middle of the day. Now, while the British at the end of the operation, they say that in their midst now, in their clutches, they have 108 men. So 108 volunteers are in custody, 5 were killed. But within that night, the next night, the IRA were back out attacking. Now, the IRA changed their MO, their method of attack, because it wasn't really large scale operations for the next month or so in Dublin. It was a couple of volunteers. They do have big spectacles, as in the shell factory. Was members of the 3rd Battalion that burned the shell factory, what's now opposite Houston Station, you know, where Hickey's thing was. So that's where the shell factory was. And what they did there was they took out the armoured cars and the tenders. And what that meant was you could not get, if that's 18 or 10 tenders that were taken out, and how many could a tender hold? That was 18, say, soldiers per lorry. So 10 of them, that's 180 soldiers that cannot get from A to B. And that's a very, very successful way of attacking the sort of how the military work and fight. Because if you take out their armoured cars, how can they fight? Where's their weapons gone? And the fire brigade had a huge role to play with that as well. So I don't think, because weapons were always a huge problem. From day one, weapons were a huge problem. I think it is, it's certainly, in my mind, it's one of the things that leads to the truce certainly being taken seriously, or serious consideration being put on this, that this ain't going to end. It really ain't going to end. And what the IRA were planning, it was huge. It was going to get a lot worse before it was going to get better.
Okay. You know, with the movie, I suppose, again, just Michael Collins, because a lot of people would have been introduced, I suppose, first to the movie when they're looking at Irish history. You know, you get the impression that Michael Collins would have had a different way of doing things and that it would have been far more successful. But did he mess up the plans himself?
Yeah. Sorry, it's probably a shock, because that's one of the things that, you know, it's Dev and Collins did not support this. Collins actually messed it up, because the original plan had been to go back to Dick McKee's plan in 1918. Oscar Traynor had this all planned out, that the barracks surrounding Dublin City, and like when you look at the amount of barracks, there was a ring of bloody steel around Dublin, you know, and that goes back to the, you know, 1798 anyway. However, his idea was that they isolate the barracks, so there'd be barricades put up in the areas, the streets surrounding the barracks. So while the 2nd Battalion lads are in attacking the custom house, if word got through to the military, then they would be delayed, and then that would give that protection to then allow the fellas to get in and get out of the custom house. Collins said no, and he said no way. There's 120 men. That is all you're getting for this operation. If you can't do 120 men, you are not doing this operation. Now, Oscar Traynor didn't push him on it. Maybe he should have, because the one criticism that you do have from the volunteers who were there is that there wasn't enough protection given, that they were too close to the action, that they should have isolated the barracks. That was Collins. Collins made Oscar Traynor change those plans. So, yes.
Would you like to play devil's advocate with you? Like, so could it be that he was, though, afraid of risking so many men? You know, was that his reason for it, or?
That is it. And the thing is, as it turns out, there wasn't just 120 men that took part. I don't know if Collins actually knew that Oscar Traynor said, lads, you know, everyone else, you are taking part, just don't say it to him. Because as it turns out, it is close to 300, and I guarantee you more names will be revealed as the pension files are being released. More names. I don't think we're going to end with the 295 names or so that I have at the moment. And it's really, you can understand where Collins was coming from with that, because it is a huge operation, and he did insist there's no intelligence officers. None of his intelligence men were at that operation that day. But after it, he went down, and he was quite pleased with what he saw, the result. And De Valera also made a statement when this argument was going on between Collins and Traynor. Dev did say, look, well, if 120 men are lost and the objective is achieved, well then, so be it. Collins is reputedly meant to have said the same thing. Okay. So it goes into the whole, you know, Collins is a bit of a, you know, he's a bit of, yeah.
Okay. What was I going to say to you? This is a controversial attack. What do you think are some of the more controversial points of the Customs House attack?
That was a military disaster, and that the IRA were wiped out. And as I said, that was my original thought before I started looking into this. But you cannot argue with the numbers, the testimonies of the people that were there. Quite clearly, it wasn't just 120 men that were involved. It is close to 300 and probably more. The other thing is that the Dev Collins thing, it was Dev's idea. It wasn't Dev's idea. Dev resurrected the plan. The Custom House was always in the sights of the IRA, and it does go back to Dick McKee when the IRA were only in the early stages of reorganising. The big one is the documents that were lost. And this was the Custom House was the seat of the civil administration in Ireland. Because I know we're just going to touch on this in a few moments. But the documents is what documents were actually lost at the Custom House. So they would be, and then of course the weapons been lost. But again, as Fallon has discovered, 80 weapons at least were returned to the IRA. So the loss of weapons isn't as severe as was previously thought, and this is thanks to these new records being revealed. So they would be some of the more controversial. Oh, and the other one, you know, why did they do it in broad daylight? Why didn't they do it at night time? Well, curfew was in.
Oh, yeah. What time did it have to be in by? Was it 10 or something, or 8? Or
I think it was 8 o'clock, somewhere around that. So you couldn't have fellas, like the amount, even if it's 120 men, like, because there would be staff, like you'd still need, you couldn't have like 5 men just going and burning all of those rooms. And the plan was that it was in the middle of the day, that was at lunchtime, no one would bat an eyelid to groups of 4 or 5 fellas walking in and their carpenter outfits and their work clothes and stuff, because we're going in to do business, which is what everyone sort of did at Custom House. But curfew, the only people that would have control of the streets at night were the military, and if you were out in the streets and you hadn't got a good reason, then most likely you'd be interrogated, locked up, and God knows what else.
When you're saying about people working, wasn't there a good story about Vinnie Byrne, I think, when he was escaping, or he go on ahead.
He managed to get away because they were all, you know, they had the front and anyway, as they were carpenters and so on. So a lot of them were walking down that day with ladders and stuff, you know, so they're just workmen going about their business. But he managed to evade arrest because he managed to sort of rub his hands in, I don't know if it was ash or something to get the smell of paraffin off his hands. Now, he had a close escape, but the soldier, the auxiliary, believed the story, and he was one that was, you know, sort of mixing in with the crowd, and he gave the story, no, I was just coming down to do this, you know, not involved in this in any way, and he managed to get away.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about the documents, and people often confuse the Four Courts with the Customs House in terms of documents. But so, what documents were there in the Customs House?
Yeah, and I'm just going to read these out because there's quite a few of them. So the big one, you had inland revenue and income tax. So I don't think anyone would really be, you know, sort of too upset for those records going missing. You have the copies of the wills. You had estate duty, local government. So anything to do with local government, including the records that were going to be sent up to the 6 counties, because the Parliament in Northern Ireland was literally getting set up, and they were actually the first documents to be destroyed because they'd been all parcelled up. So when the lads walked in, there's all these neat bundles of records, and it was all to do with local government to be sent up there. Stamp office, and that's in state duty. Yeah, so they're the records that were there. In the Four Courts, it's the census, and people they talk about the census records. That's the Four Courts. They weren't actually in the Custom House, and ones that had been in the Custom House had actually been destroyed. Well before 1921, they were pulled for paper. During the war, they'd actually been destroyed in the 1890s, and there's letters saying, you know, make sure there's copies of these records. No one checked if there was a copy, and they pulped the originals. So they were long gone before the IRA went in 1921.
Jesus Christ, okay. You mentioned this already, but we'll just hammer this home. Was the burning of the Customs House a failure in the sense of wiping out the IRA?
I really don't believe it, and I'll just give you a figure. So, and again, it's all documented and so on. So you have, if you look at the operation that day, 108 are arrested, 5 are killed. So that's what 113 out of possibly 300 people that took part. So that's a third, for want of a better, well, not great enough, that are arrested, but that's still pretty much 2/3 of the units that were involved. That's only a section of the units. Figures for the Dublin Brigade at the time of the truce. So when these guys are in prison and stuff, you had over 4,500 members of the Dublin Brigade as volunteers, be they part-time, full-time volunteers. So a lot of them were full or part-time, and that's across the board across the country. For about 470 of them were in prison. So that still left over 4,000 members of the Dublin Brigade of the IRA still out and still active. The active service unit, they could have reorganised that 4 times over, because there were fellas that were screaming to get in to the active service unit, which was the full-time unit. You have the 3rd and 4th Battalion up in their games, 3rd Battalion that carry out the attack on the shell factory, that take out all the lorries and the armoured cars. And then you have what was planned, what was coming, the big shoot 'em up operation for June, July, where they were going to basically shoot every auxiliary and their companion on O'Connell Street. It was literally called off before the truce came in, because they knew the truce was coming in. There was going to be another Bloody Sunday, and also the IRA were going to do what was happening over here, as in that the families by the auxiliaries were targeting the families of volunteers. Well, the IRA were going to start doing that in England, that they had the names and addresses of all the auxiliaries officers, and they were going to start targeting their families, not them, not the auxiliaries, but their families. And the addresses and all are in Florio Donoghue's papers. That's all documented. So as I said earlier, it was going to get an awful lot worse before it was going to get better.
Okay. What role did it have at a national level during the War of Independence?
Well, I suppose it's part of it. As I said earlier, there were a number of large-scale operations. Like, large operations were not unique to Dublin, to the Custom House. Now, it's the largest single operation that the Dublin Brigade took part in since 1916. But if you look throughout late 1920, early 1921, you had Crossbarry down Cork, 104 volunteers of members of the West Cork Brigade Flying Column took part in that, got out by the skin of their teeth. You had Clonfin, led by Sean McKeown. There was Cara Kennedy ambush. So big operations where you've got 50, 60, sometimes 100 volunteers taking part. I suppose where the Custom House fits in, because there's so many fronts that this war is fought on, that it is a guerrilla war, it's an assassination war, it's an intelligence war, it's a propaganda war, and what fits into that is the undermining the civil administration, which is represented by the Custom House, and it's the culmination in the war against the civil administration, because throughout 1920 you had the attacks against the civil administration, with the burning of the record offices in 1920, with the setting up of the Republican courts. It was completely undermining. So while you have around the country that's the auxiliaries, the soldiers getting attacked, you do also have that war going on against the civil administration, which culminates in the burning of Custom House in 21.
Okay. Like, in your point of view, or from your own opinion, success or failure, or both?
Success. And I sort of couldn't say failure after writing a book about it, could I? No, seriously. In my mind, success. The objective was achieved. If you look at it from the point of view of the operation and what the objective was, the contents of the building were to be destroyed. If you want an unexpected aspect of this, that the whole building was destroyed, but the contents were destroyed. The IRA were not on their knees, and you find that throughout the War of Independence, it goes in waves, that the British have successes where it looks like the IRA are down, but then the IRA come back, and that's the way it goes. And you do have that with the Custom House. Literally within a day, within 2 days, the Dublin Brigade is back out and they're attacking. They just changed their MO. When you look at the propaganda success, because this was the thing, De Valera wanted international attention to be brought on Ireland, and my God, did that happen. If you look at the newspaper reports from like tiny obscure towns in America reporting on this, to Le Perlan, the French newspaper, where it does, you showed the sketch earlier on, a very dramatic drawing of the operation and the events of that day. So they were the objectives. Now, although you do have 108 men in prison, 5 were killed. If you look at Clonmult, where you have the volunteers. They lost more volunteers at Clonmult. They lost other volunteers, 5 and 6, that were actually gone. They were not coming back. The British, can you honestly say to me that the British were going to execute 108 fellas?
No.
These are the questions that have to be asked. And when you listen to the guys, the fellas themselves that were in prison were having a grand old time. In their letters, in their autograph books, they're saying they're having a grand old rest. This is not the end. They're just recharging their batteries, and when the next phase comes, they're going to be there ready and waiting to go. So in their minds, this was not a failure. And all of the documentation that I've looked at, and again, I'm not the first person to say this. Michael Kelly said it in the 1940s, Sean O'Mahony said it in the 1990s. Historians were saying it. So I success in my mind.
Okay. There's video footage of you today actually going to visit the memorial, the lay a plaque or lay a wreath. Can you tell me about the memorial that's there?
Yeah, so as Sean Hogan says, he thinks it's the only Sean Hogan works in the Custom House, and we've got great support from the Custom House who facilitate the conference and the event for the relatives every year. He says he thinks it's the only building that has a memorial to the lads who burnt it. But this, you have the photograph up there. And in 1948, because you had commemorations within a year, 1922, if you can imagine, this country was on the brink of civil war. Yeah. And fellas who were going to kill each other, who had been fighting together, who fought together in the Custom House, were literally going to be enemies a month later. But in May 1922, there were a number of masses held. They commemorated, those men commemorated the Custom House. And after the Civil War, that continued. And you have then 1948, a memorial committee was set up. And so they commissioned Breton sculptor Jean-René Goulet to do the sculpture that you see there. That was unveiled on the 21st of May 1956, was the 25th anniversary, and Sean Teo Kelly was there, Oscar Traynor was there, who, you know, wouldn't be alive had it not been for the efforts of Dan Head that day. And Memorial Road, which is the road that surrounds the Custom House, that's named after the Dublin Brigade. So that was all part of the commemoration. And there were annual commemorations, but over the years, you know, the members, they got old, they passed away, but the relatives had continued. But it's just now expanded because, as I said at the start, myself and Micheál just happened to be doing this while we were working in Commemorations. Commemorations attracted a lot of people whose relatives had been there, got chatting, and then the two worlds came together, and now it's an annual thing where anything close to 100 relatives of these men go there to commemorate them every 25th May.
Okay. You mentioned before there was a capsule there, or? Yeah,
there's a time capsule, and the newspaper reports are fantastic, you know, of the unveiling and the whole ceremony. But there is a time capsule that was put in, and it contains a list of the people who were involved, and including coming on. And there's meant to be a medal and so on. It would be brilliant if you could see that what actually is in the time capsule, but it's apparently in the base of the memorial.
Okay, we'd need another burning in order to see that.
Maybe 2021.
Listen, it's the 99th anniversary this year. So why is next year so important? What do you hope to do?
Oh, well, and there you've got, just look, there's a crowd of people. Absolutely, it's a fantastic thing to see the relatives there. Sorry, well, unfortunately we couldn't have the conference and the annual relatives day because of the restrictions, but fingers crossed, if everything goes well next year, what we would see would be a number of events over a couple of days. In my mind, and I know, well, Micheál has sort of exorbitant plans, which I won't divulge because he could be arrested, but it would be family days, a conference, obviously, to look at all aspects of the operation, the lead up to it, the aftermath, because over the years, the story itself stays the same. New information is added to it. We always tell the fireman's story, the military aspect, the British perspective, the people who died, but then there's other elements that are brought in. And so every year we try to look back, say 1920, we were going to focus on fire as a weapon, you know, because it is this massive weapon that is used in 1921. So I think as well that there's plans for a visitor centre. They're going to look at redoing the visitor centre in the Custom House. And events like that, it would be lovely if there was some way we could sort of have a concert, or what I would love to do, I don't know if it will happen or not, but there was a film, Irish Destiny, that was made in the late 1920s
or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going through the Dublin, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the Custom House. It's like the whole story is the born of the Custom House. And you could you imagine like on the lawn, you know, big screen, and everyone just out watching that, you know, after the event, you know, with the relatives or something. That would be lovely. Something that, you know, it wouldn't be too hard to do, you know. But I said, Micheál now will have maybe a few more elaborate ideas, but I'll keep you posted.
Okay, one last thing. I want your thoughts on this photo here. What is this, and can you elaborate on it?
Okay, so this is what started it all. This is the photo album. This is the photo album that Micheál came to me and said, Liz, do you know who these fellas are? And I went, oh, I know that name. Oh, I know that name. Knew that name. And then started looking at the witness statements. And then the story was just revealed that these are the Custom House Fire Brigade. Now, it's not the actual fire brigade. They themselves call them that. They call themselves the Custom House Fire Brigade. They sign it in their autograph books. They had little poems and all, and it's how proud they are to be members of the Custom House Fire Brigade. Now, we are privileged today in that we can look back on events 100 years ago and say, right, it wasn't a success, it was a failure, it was success. That is our privilege. These are the people who did it. These are the people who lived it. And these men, when I first started researching this, probably 40 out of those 68 fellas, they were not saying it was a disaster. And whether we agree or disagree with them, we cannot ignore them. And they're the reason that this story, that I was able to tell this story. And it was an honour for me to do so. But because of this album, and that man in the centre, that's Cyril Daly, he was the one who made the camera in Kilmainham. They took these photographs. They're all taken, like, you know, they're keeping watch out for the guards and stuff, because this is on the backyards of Kilmainham Jail. I won't tell you the way they sort of how they actually did the photographs and developed the photographs, but there is a story behind that as well.
Okay.
But these are the men. We cannot ignore them. Agree with them, disagree with them, but we can't ignore them.
Okay.
And that's why.
Well, thanks very much for that, Liz. Why is it, just before I ask questions for everybody, why is it so important to you, the Customs House? You mentioned it before the talk.
Because this story was forgotten about. If it was talked about, it was just, it's a disaster. But why is it a disaster? Who's saying it's a disaster? And then as I started looking into it, the men who were there, they were not saying it was a disaster. Those who were not there said it was a disaster. And I don't know if that's to do with Civil War politics, the whole Devil era, Collins divide, because you do have people who say, oh, it was a disaster, but they weren't there. They actually were not there. So I would prefer to listen to the men who are actually there. And as I said earlier, the criticism that you have from guys is the fellas that were on the outside saying that we were too close. We should have been further away. So the original plan to have them at the barracks. But I've met people whose fathers were involved, and they did not want to talk about the Custom House. Really? And their fathers are proud of it. And it's like when you see that, and it's like, no, you know, it has been forgotten, and it shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah.
And to do that, and for one person, I just remember one person came up to me one time and just said, I just feel very, very proud that I'm here in the place of my father. I wasn't, they were a bit ashamed of it. And when they started meeting with their relatives and them to watch them swap their stories and to see the photographs and these actual personalities emerge, because I'm only getting a photograph, I'm only getting a witness statement. But when you see the relatives together, it's a person that emerges, and that is amazing to witness and amazing to get access to. So it's my honor to be able to do that, to tell the story of those men. And look, it's a huge event, regardless of whether we say it's a success or failure. No one can deny it's a huge event.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've loads and loads of comments here. Okay, so let's run through them. David Flood, could you talk a little bit about how the burning of the Customs House generated newspaper headlines in Ireland, Britain, and further abroad?
Huge. It was huge. There were reports from newspapers all across Ireland. And then, as I said, you have like the most obscure towns in America reporting. This went far and wide, and in England as well. And another thing about England was that they were actually planning to hit the financial centre in Liverpool on the day of the Custom House, and that was reported in the newspapers. So that objective of De Valera, that the international media would focus on Ireland, huge. And then if you look at it from the Republican end of it as well, because the Republicans had their own newspaper, the Irish Bulletin, and they printed, it was a weekly newspaper that was sent all across the world. And the only version I could find before they reprinted it was the French edition describing the burning of the Custom House. So in France they got it, in Italy they got it, in Spain they got it. Anywhere you had a Republican consul, the word was sent out. And Sean T. O'Kelly, they say it was their regret that the building was destroyed. But this is what happened. And it's very interesting as well to point out, and I will say that the first two buildings to be renovated by the Free State government in 24 and 27, I think it was, were the Custom House and the Four Courts. So that's something to be sort of, I suppose, admired. But to answer David's question, there's just such a broad range of newspaper reports about it.
Okay. Liam has mentioned that over 420 volunteers committed to this one essentially guerrilla operation. Did anybody, I know you mentioned about Collins, but did anybody in a leadership position oppose this operation apart from Collins, or were they all for it?
No, all for it, because they had a meeting in December 1920 when Dev had come back from America. Yeah. So he's saying basically we're going to have this big meeting and so on, and then it happened in January in the house of the O'Reilly 40 Herbert Park, which is the whole thing in the news recently. But that's where they put forward the proposals, and Calabrew and all were at this meeting. All of the big names were at this meeting, and the only one that points out his objections was Collins. And it wasn't to the actual operation, it was to the way the operation was going to be carried out, as in isolating the barracks. It's not the operation he is objecting to, because he had sanctioned it with Dick McKee in 1918, and in 1920 he didn't sanction it because the big operation he had, and which was a massive success, was the burning of local record offices around the country.
Okay. I have a tricky question here from Johnny Doyle. Why was the building not touched in 1916?
Well, the British took it over. As far as I can recall, the British took it over quite early on.
Yeah.
I think that's why. And if you look again, it's just sort of a bit like the Dublin Castle. Massive. It is a massive complex. It's a huge complex to actually hold and fortify. And I suppose, if you had the 10,000 volunteers coming out, it would be a different story, but the numbers on Easter Monday just didn't add up. So I don't think it was seen as wouldn't have been seen as one of the most important buildings to occupy in the round.
Yeah, David Flood's echoing that in the comments as well. Liam has mentioned Crossbarry had happened just 2 months prior to this operation. There's a school of thought that Crossbarry was the turning point in favour of Republicans. Was there a need for a Tet-like operation like in Vietnam with so many volunteers committed to it?
As in Crossbarry?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose with Crossbarry and Cork, it's when you look at who was down in Cork and who the IRA were up against, it would be, from my understanding of it, and just from looking at like Tom Barry and so on, what was happening down in Cork, you had to show your strength. And I suppose if you look at, and again, it sort of goes back to the point that I made earlier, that the War of Independence goes in waves, that it looks like the IRA are defeated. If you look at October, November 1920, and Lloyd George famously says, we have murder by the throat, and then 11 days later, you've got Bloody Sunday and you've got Kilmichael. The same thing happens in 1921 because you have Clonmouth. There's a couple of losses, big losses for the IRA. So they have to show that they're not on their knees. And Crossbarry is definitely one of them. Cara Kennedy was another one. That was because the ambush before that, sorry, I'll just have it here. It was the Kilmena ambush on the 19th of May, where the volunteers had lost a number. It was pretty high losses for the volunteers. They came back with Cara Kennedy, and that was a big success. So you have that throughout the war. So I don't know if you'd see it as a tech thing, but basically it just lots to show that the IRA were not on their knees.
Okay.
In my mind.
Pat Murphy, how many went to Kilmainham? Like, why did a few of them give alias names?
Well, that was the other thing. Well, a lot of them would give aliases because you don't want them to know that you have you. Because a lot of them that would have given aliases were also members of the squad, or would be attached to, would be well-known members of the active service unit and so on. So you do have a number of them given aliases. The ones that they knew they had in their midst were the ones that were taken to Mountjoy. So regardless of if they gave aliases, they would have been aware of what their real identity was. So it's just to protect their own identity that they did that.
Okay. Dan Jack, the IRA at that stage organised into divisional commands. Were larger scale operations now firmly on the agenda?
Well, if you look at the likes of the ambushes that were happening like late or sort of around February, March, it does seem to be that the bigger operations do take place, as well as the regular sort of ambushes on patrols. But in terms of Dublin, what they were planning, yes, I would say it was basically try and take control or to sort of come across or portray that the IRA were not defeated, because that operation that they were planning, the shoot 'em up, and that would be a suicide mission, because they were going to bring every available volunteer. They were going to isolate the 6 points of O'Connell Street, everything that was on O'Connell Street after curfew. And this is what it would be coming after curfew. So these fellas knew that they weren't getting out alive, and they were going to shoot everyone that was out on O'Connell Street. That was called off just prior to the operation taking place. As I said, another Bloody Sunday, because you had the IGO gang were very effective against the IRA, and you had, like, on Mike Kennedy's talk with Charlie Dalton, he mentions like Charlie Dalton having the sort of very close shave with IGO, and other the British administration were reorganising their intelligence. So these were the big operations that were going to be planned, and they were going to be taking it to England. The war was going to go to England as well. So big operations there.
Liam as a comment more, militarily disastrous but possibly politically successful. David Flood, like so many other battles and so many different wars. Johnny Doyle, why did you need so many volunteers when a fire brigade could be relied on to aid the fire?
Good point. Yeah, maybe they should have just gotten the fire brigades to go in. I suppose they would be the ones that would get in easily through curfew. But I suppose you couldn't raise the suspicion though if the fire brigade went into a building and set it on fire and then putting it out. Yeah, but they certainly played their part.
Okay, okay. It was Tobacco with Vinnie Byrne.
Tobacco, thank you.
Yeah. Mel McCubbin, did removal of some of the most active men from the Dublin brigade help the provisional government to move forward with truce discussions and halt the revolution? I would say like, did the removal of some of the most active men from the Dublin brigade help the provisional government to move forward with truce discussions and halt the revolution?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Because Collins was still out, and Collins would be he was a fairly active. Collins is one of the extreme, members. I don't know. No, I don't honestly know. I don't think so, because if you look at the testimonies or the letters and in the autograph books, the guys themselves are saying, right, the truce, this is just a chance for us to recharge our batteries. Not one of them actually thought, I don't think, a bit like Tom Barry, that the truce was going to lead to a treaty negotiation.
Yeah.
For them, it was just, this is going to start up again, and we're going to be well fed, we're going to be well rested, and we'll be back out. And I don't know, because if you look at the likes of, like, how influential could the likes of the squad members or so on, how it would be if Oscar Traynor was arrested, who had sort of like that connection with De Valera, or if Cathal Brugha was arrested, but they weren't. So I don't think it would. Yeah,
it's like easy for us to like join the dots with the benefit of hindsight, but they didn't have it, Yeah. Let's see. Some were sent to what is now Collins Barracks. There were 6 to a cell, and were given 3 pieces of thread and 3 cups of water till they were transferred to Commemorations jail, and they thought it was a success. David Flood, well done to Micheál and Liz for a fantastic annual conference, and here's to the big one in 2021. It's going to be massive. Kathleen Cleary, thank you, Liz, for an inspiring lecture. Sandra Kay, have to say, have thoroughly enjoyed tonight. Many thanks. From Liam Guramaya, good amazing lecture tonight from Liz. My August, my do Marcus. Shocked in the Gaelga, Van May on Suit Ass. Joe Mooney, thanks Liz and Marcus, that was excellent. Jeremy Lally, tremendous talk, Liz, gorgeous. Pat Murphy, why did Gerard Hughes give an alias name?
Again, it would be if he was on the radar. And he's one of them that actually scuppered me, because I can't remember his real name, but I know who you're talking about. And it's like, that's the same fella. But yeah, he signed his name, Hughes. And then when I discovered that he was who he really was, it was like, yay, light bulb moment. But it would be basically to protect themselves, because you would have people coming in. The way they had it in Commemorations jail, they were like out in the yards. There was an ID hub that people were brought into the hus, and the prisoners were then marched in front. You have this at Bloody Sunday, in the aftermath of Bloody Sunday. So people were being brought to identify, because we do know that there were spies, there were informers, and to protect their identity. So, a false name, it's a bit of protection. If they're not sure about who you are, then, it's that little added protection for them.
Okay. Frank's got, I think, commented nice. Brilliant stuff, Liz. You're on fire. Right?
Sorry.
What a great picture. Paula, first time on, really enjoyed tonight. Thank you. Dermot Aylward, great lecture, Liz. Well done. Well done, Marks and Liz and Mel. John Murphy. What is the annual family day? Well, I mean, that's on May the 25th.
25th. Yeah, the conference takes place the Saturday closest to. But the actual day itself is the 25th of
May. Okay. User column, well done, Marks and Liz. Therese McIntyre, how's it going, Therese? Brilliant lecture, Liz, well done. Minota McGillicuddy, love the lecture, Marks and Liz, marvellous. Bernie Gibbons, so well researched by Liz. Paul Reed, thank you, Liz and Marcus, for your time tonight. Was Neil Jordan in attendance? I've got 4 documentaries on that man, I'm catching up, right? And Liz is in them. From Kieran, beautiful job, Liz. Thank you. Joni Scanlon, fantastic talk interview. Thank you, Liz and Marcus. Christina McMullen, excellent talk. Thank you. You'd be there talking, thinking, God, is anybody here at all? We're just having a phone chat and everything. Daniel's iPad, another great history lecture tonight. Thanks to Liz for bringing it alive. I always thought if it was a failure due to the numbers arrested, that view has changed tonight. So well done and keep up being as enthusiastic. Thanks for bringing the subject to life. Jim Dolan, well done, Liz, on the super presentation as always. My father was always very proud of his involvement, as was all his Unit D Company 3rd Battalion.
Sorry.
No, go on ahead, go on.
No, I loved 3rd Battalion because my great uncle was in 3rd Battalion, so yeah.
Oh. Goes deep, Liz, goes deep. Frank, very proud of my grandfather, Thomas Figg, in G Company, 1st Battalion, Dublin Brigade. I'm reading out all the comments because, you know, you didn't get a chance to have your event, so we're going to read out them all, right? Very proud of my grandfather, Thomas Figg, in G Company, 1st Battalion, Dublin Brigade, was one of the volunteers who took part in this operation, Frank Fagan. Thank you, Liz and Marcus. Liam says no need to cover every question. I'm doing it, Liam. They're not getting their event, okay? Absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Johnny Doyle, well done. Another good session. Gurmila Mayagut, brilliant, Liz. Thank you. Well done, Liz and Marcus. Enjoyed so much. Brilliant talk. Ronnie Crombie, brilliant, Liz. Thanks again, Marcus, organising even history lectures. Well, it's Liam who organises them. I just host them sometimes. And recording for those unable to attend. Thanks to Veronique from France. Pat Murphy, brilliant first night on and so interesting. Fair play to you. Conor Dullahan, thanks guys, Brill. Peter O'Connor, gorgeous. Deirdre, brilliant. Liz and Marcus and Michael, and great guys from Shea Olintig. Now I just want to say just two things. Okay, the first thing is this: if anybody, we did the burning of the barracks. We've now done the burning of the Customs House in terms of centenary, well, nearly centenary commemorations in this circumstance. But if any county wants to get in touch in terms of us commemorating their history, please get in touch. We will do this. What I do want to say about Liz is I think she's a fantastic historian. Her book is absolutely gripping. If you thought this talk was interesting, wait till you read her book, Burning of the Customs House from Commemorations.ie. It's absolutely fantastic. I'd just like to say thanks a million, Liz. And Liam and Neve, if you want to unmute everybody so we can give her a round of applause.
I'm on, Liz.
Oh, thanks a million, everyone.
We'll have some session at the 100.
Frank, how are you?
Good morning.